What if your memories weren't yours? What if the war you were trained to fight was never meant to be won? In a future shaped by genetic code and buried voices, two young operatives, Riven and Sela, begin to unravel the truth of their own existence. Born to obey, engineered to bloom, but something inside them refuses to follow orders. What begins as a military mystery becomes a journey through identity, betrayal, and something far more powerful than weapons, free will. This is the Blooming War, a story of roots deeper than blood, and a final question that no system can silence. Who do you become when you're no longer told what to be? The observation chamber at Veritas Bloomhold was quiet, eerily so. No hum of machinery, no instructors speaking into comms. Just silence, broken only by the synchronized breathing of Riven Corin and his twin sister Sela, standing side by side in the simulation pit. They were barefoot, clothed in thin gray training suits that clung to their skin and revealed the fine lattice of bioconductive threads pulsing faintly beneath. The lights dimmed. A single tone rang out, low, metallic, almost like a heartbeat through metal walls. Begin pulse test 19.3. A voice echoed flatly over the intercom. Engage Thornlink sync. Initiating psychometric resonance. Riven flexed his hands, jaw tight. He hated this part, the way the Thornlink dug into his thoughts like a second spine. Across from him, Sela exhaled slowly, her eyes closed. Unlike him, she didn't resist it. She flowed with it. Within seconds, the bond ignited. He didn't see her, but he felt her. A ripple of presence surged through his spine, brushing against the base of his skull. Her heartbeat, her awareness, the weight of her thoughts, they all laced into his. Their minds blurred for just a moment and then locked. Cognitive sync at 94%, the voice confirmed. Rising, then it started. The chamber around them shifted. Walls evaporated into horizonless white. Illusory hostiles materialized. Hulking drones, programmed to trigger fight or flight. Riven crouched low, slipping into combat reflex as one lunged. He pivoted, brought it down with a swift blow. Sela moved like shadow beside him, her blade already drawing an arc of simulated light through the next drone's chest. But then, pain spiked, the voice said alarmed. Riven blinked. His shoulder flared with fire, though he hadn't been touched. He looked up. Sela had taken a hit, a small, direct pulse to the ribs. But she stood straight, unshaken. The pain wasn't hers. It was his. The connection faltered, then surged again. Now he was feeling her every breath like a tremor in his spine. His vision split. Half simulation, half some strange echo of memory. A flash of red light. A forest of glistening vines. Something not human screaming in a language he didn't know, but somehow understood. Abort sequence, the technician's voice barked. Too late. Riven fell to one knee, eyes wide, his hands gripping his own skull. Sela, stop, he gasped. But she wasn't moving. She stood still, staring straight at him, her irises glowing faintly violet, lips parted like she just heard her name called from far, far away. Then black. The room dropped into silence. Moments later, the simulation faded. The lights returned. The drones dissolved. And both twins stood motionless in the center of the chamber. Commander Halrich's Vade's boots echoed as he entered from the side observation corridor. He paused just behind a glass partition, watching them. Corin twins, he muttered, his voice low but edged with unease. What in the soul are you two becoming? Inside the pit, Sela blinked, awareness returning like a tide. Riven looked up, face pale. Their Thornlink had stabilized again. But something had changed. They could feel it in the air, like the test hadn't measured them, but awakened something instead. The training bay was nearly empty when Riven Corin returned that night. The simulation rigs stood in silence, dim lights casting elongated shadows across the steel floor. He hadn't told anyone he was coming back, especially not Sela. She'd retreated to her dorm without a word after the failed pulse test. Her silence was worse than shouting. Riven climbed into one of the older sensor chairs and let it recline. The worn leather creaked beneath him, familiar, grounding. He closed his eyes, fingers twitching slightly from the residual static of the Thornlink sync. And then it returned. The sound, not mechanical, not internal, organic, a low murmur, like leaves whispering underwater. It wasn't coming from his ears, but somewhere behind them, somewhere in the soft, ancient tissue no implant could map. It pressed against the edge of thought, brushing words he didn't understand. Not words, he corrected himself. more like shape sounds, emotions pretending to be syllables. He sat up fast, breath catching. The room was quiet. The rigs were off. The system showed no active feedback loop. And yet, it was still there, just faint enough to make him question if it had ever stopped. Riv. He turned. Sela stood at the doorway, barefoot, her expression neutral, but her eyes tracking him with sharp awareness. You feel it too? He asked. She stepped forward. I didn't say anything. You didn't have to. She walked closer, slowly, like approaching a wounded animal. I've heard it since the last long-range sim. The one over Kalixvarn. Only in dreams, though. Until today. Riven stood, heart thudding. It's not a glitch. It's us, Cell. Something in us is echoing back. Sela tilted her head. We're trying to get out. Neither spoke for a while. They simply stood in the middle of the darkened bay, surrounded by machines built to measure war readiness, not whispers from bones. Eventually, she said softly, they always said the Thorn Link made us stronger. But what if, Riven replied, it's not the Link doing this? She looked at him. Then what is? He didn't answer. He couldn't, because deep in the base of his skull, the murmur rose again, clearer this time, and it sounded like someone saying his name, but not in any voice he recognized. The simulation chamber shimmered into being around Riven Corin like a waking dream, familiar, false, and full of teeth. Terrain built itself in layers. Jagged ruins, scorched fields, and the faint outlines of enemy units slowly resolving from static. The test scenario was simple, squad survival under variable pressure. Riven and Sela stood back-to-back at the center of a wide, artificial courtyard, the Thorn Link between them humming steady. No instructors, no audience, just the two of them and a dozen drone units closing in. He raised his training blade. Sela tapped her heel twice, a signal to split wide. They moved in fluid sync, years of drills compressed into instinct. But as he pivoted toward the first drone, Riven caught something strange in the periphery. A shimmer, a flicker, a red haze at the corner of his eye that didn't match the simulation parameters. And then it happened. A drone lunged at Sela. Riven saw her twist, dodge, bring her blade up, and he gasped, stumbling back, clutching at a spot just beneath his ribs. The pressure was sharp, cold, deep. But when he looked down, his glove was wet. With blood. Actual blood. He stared, stunned. That wasn't possible. There were no physical injuries in sim mode. His suit wasn't torn. His skin wasn't broken. And yet, Sela, he shouted. But she didn't answer. She stood frozen, blade hanging at her side, eyes unfocused. Her lips moved, slowly, like she was repeating a word she couldn't quite form. The terrain flickered again, and the simulation glitched. The battlefield fell away, briefly revealing a forest. Not one programmed into Blumhold's archives. The trees were impossibly tall, their bark glowing with slow pulses of bioluminescence. Vines snaked between trunks like nerves. Beneath them, pools of dark red liquid shimmered like veins exposed to air. Riven blinked. He wasn't in the courtyard anymore. He was in it. The forest. The smell of wet earth. The hum of distant creatures. The vibration underfoot. It was real. Too real. And then he saw himself. Not quite. A figure. His shape, his size, but altered. Pale, translucent skin threaded with faint light. Fingers too long. Eyes too wide. And on its chest, a crest made of living moss and bone. It turned toward him and smiled. Riven, it said, in a voice that wasn't voice at all. Then it all collapsed. The simulation screeched, overloaded. Static replaced terrain. Emergency override triggered. Lights surged back to full. He was on his knees, gasping. Sela knelt beside him, pale but steady. You saw it too, she whispered. He couldn't speak, only nod. The blood on his glove was gone, but the memory remained, embedded deep beneath the skin. Something had bled through, and it wasn't part of the test. Sela Corin waited until the night cycle hit deep silence. When even the ventilation fans at Veritas Blumhold lowered into whisper mode and the outer corridor lights dimmed to amber. She moved like breath through the maintenance levels, bypassing the first lock with her standard access chip. The second took finesse. Not brute force, but rhythm. She'd watched Marek Solin override it once with a sequence tied to heart rate patterns. She mimicked the pulse intervals from memory, 3 short, 1 long, hold, release. Click. The archive core doors slid open. Inside, the air was colder. The room glowed with rows of memory cylinders stacked like frozen veins, each pulsing faintly with neural data. This wasn't where they stored training records. This was deeper, older. Sela slid her wrist pad into a side terminal, rerouting its permissions through a dummy training protocol. She keyed in their names. Riven Corin, Sela Corin. Results populated instantly, too quickly. Her breath caught. The metadata tags weren't standard Bloomhold files. They were tagged with a code she hadn't seen before. PVBL 0007 and PVBL 0008. She followed the strings. The header on the root file read, Project Verdin Bloom. Active Bloom entities. Cognitive maturation phase. She scrolled, fingers numb. The documents weren't just DNA maps. They were construction logs, timelines, selective gene activations, emotional response modulation overlays. Their birth dates were wrong. Their neuromapping began before gestation. And worse, the baseline genome wasn't Terran. It was hybridized, patterned off an ancient root classification she didn't recognize. Not alien, not human, something older, something unnamed. Footsteps echoed down the hall. She shut the terminal instantly, pulled the data chip, and slipped into the side crawlway before the security drone passed by. Crouched in the vent, chip pressed to her chest. Sela didn't shake. She just breathed, slowly, evenly, while her mind spiraled through what she had just seen. She and Riven weren't just exceptional cadets. They were prototypes. The dust along the Fron divide clung to Riven Corin's boots like ash. The trees here were skeletal, twisted remains of a once lush border zone between Terran territory and what used to be alien strongholds. Now it was just patrol duty and dead ground. Or so they said. His unit moved cautiously, sweeping in a tight arc. Sela trailed just behind, silent, her eyes scanning without pause. She hadn't spoken much since sneaking back from the archive room, but Riven could feel something simmering in her, the kind of weight you don't talk about unless it starts leaking out of your hands. Then came the signal, movement ahead. Riven raised a fist. The others stopped. Sensors went live. No comm chatter, protocol for hot zones. They crept forward. Half buried in a tangle of collapsed bio-tissue and shattered armor was a figure. Not Terran. Its skin was dull silver, stretched thin across a narrow frame. The body convulsed once, then fell still. Still alive. Riven ignored the silent protests on his team's private channel and stepped forward, lowering his rifle. The creature's chest rose shallowly. A single eye, deep blue like a gas giant, opened and locked onto him. It didn't flinch. It reached for him, and without thinking, he reached back. Their fingers met, and in that moment, the world fell away. He felt a surge, not pain, not fear, but recognition, like a door opening in his bones. The alien's hand was cold, almost brittle, but the connection was warm, familiar. Then it spoke, not loud, inside. Riven. The voice was wrong. It wasn't guttural or alien. It was soft, gentle. It was Sela's voice. He recoiled instantly, gasping, stumbling back. The contact broke. The alien exhaled once and died. Sela was at his side in seconds, kneeling beside him, hand gripping his shoulder. What happened? He looked at her, pale. It knew my name. That's not possible. It said it like you would. They stared at each other, surrounded by the wind and the bones of a war long past. Something had reached through the divide today, and it hadn't come with weapons. It had come with a memory. Riven Corin hadn't slept properly in days. Not since the alien said his name. Not since it spoke in his sister's voice. But when sleep finally came, it did not come gently. He found himself standing beneath a vast dome of translucent stone, like pearls stretched thin over the sky. The air was thick, humming with a low-frequency resonance that pulsed in time with something deeper than a heartbeat. He looked down at his hands, pale, almost luminous, fingers longer than they should be. And yet, they felt familiar. Rows of pods lined the floor, hundreds of them, nestled into the walls like seeds in a hive. Each one pulsed with a soft green light, mist curling from their seams. He approached one and saw a figure sleeping inside. His own face, but altered, smoother, less human. His reflection opened its eyes. The dream didn't dissolve, it deepened. He walked through halls made of living material, semi-organic latticework that responded to his movements. The walls curved when he passed, arching like they were watching. He understood the architecture, though he'd never seen it. Vault Theranine. He knew the name. There were others. figures drifting in and out of view. Their skin shimmered with tones that shifted in light, pale silver, soft greens, deep violet threading through veins. They didn't speak, but he understood them. He didn't hear their thoughts, but he felt them. Their presence wasn't intrusive. It was shared, woven into the air like pollen. One of them stopped before him. He touched Riven's chest with 2 fingers. And in an instant, Riven remembered. He wasn't dreaming. He was remembering. The feeling shattered him awake. Riven bolted upright in his bunk at Veritas Bloomhold, drenched in sweat, lungs aching. The Thorn Link monitor embedded in the wall lit up with rapid pulse spikes and irregular cortical activity. The system flagged the event as unresolved trauma echo, but that meant nothing to him now. He pressed a hand to his chest. It was still there, that warmth from the dream, the sense of belonging to something older. Not alien, not human, just rooted. He barely heard the knock on his door. It creaked open. Sela stepped inside, her voice low. "You were calling out," she said, but not in Terran. Riven looked up, face pale, eyes unfocused. "I wasn't speaking," he murmured. "I was being called." They said nothing else. She sat beside him in silence, and together they watched the Thorn Link monitor flicker, its pulse strangely in sync with his second signal. One neither of them recognized, but both had heard before. Somewhere deep, somewhere below. Sela Corin didn't speak as she prepped the scan interface. Riven lay beneath the halo of the cognitive array, arms folded across his chest, eyes closed, breathing steady. He trusted her implicitly, and that trust made her hands shake. The sleep monitoring protocol had been blacklisted by Veritas Bloomhold months ago. Too invasive, too unpredictable. But Sela had bypassed the restrictions, pieced the system back together using fragments from old Simtech archives and a calibration file left behind by Dr. Ylaradren herself. She didn't know what she was looking for, only that something inside her brother had changed. The neural interface blinked to life, casting soft blue light across Riven's forehead. Lines of code danced up the side screen. Pulse readings, theta band oscillations, synaptic bounce latency. All normal, all within bounds. Until they weren't. A spike appeared, not sharp but deep, like a pulse from the marrow of the brain. And with it a voice. She didn't hear it with her ears. She felt it, like a ripple brushing her skin from inside the machine. It wasn't Riven's voice. Not exactly, but it wasn't alien either. She isolated the wave signature, cross-checked it against known Bloomhold datasets. Nothing. Then, out of instinct, she layered it against her own voice profile, just to rule out feedback contamination. That's when her stomach dropped. The emotional signature embedded in the wave, its tonal residue, matched hers. Not perfectly, not syntactically, but rhythm, cadence, neural tone, it carried her. Somehow, this voice, buried deep in Riven's dream echo, was imprinted with her emotional DNA. She pulled off the headset. Riven opened his eyes slowly, blinking into the soft light above. "You saw something," he said. "I heard something," she corrected, voice tight. "No, felt something." "What did it say?" She hesitated. "It didn't say. It echoed." He sat up, wincing slightly. "It's been there for a while. Beneath the surface. I thought it was just noise at first, but then it started feeling like a memory I never lived." She nodded slowly. "Or a memory we both lived, but from different sides." They stared at each other for a long moment. Twins bound not just by blood, but by a thorn link that now seemed less like technology and more like an artifact. A bridge. Or worse, a trap. Sela exhaled. "Riv, this doesn't feel like someone tampering with us." His voice dropped to a whisper. "It feels like someone built us for this." The room was silent except for the soft humming of the neural array. But somewhere in the low subsonic ranges beneath conscious hearing, the system picked up another flicker, another trace of that buried voice, still resonating, still alive. And listening. Dr. Ylaradren didn't open the door for them. She disabled the perimeter defense field and let them find their own way in. The observatory sat at the edge of Veritas Bloomhold's restricted zone, long decommissioned, buried beneath layers of camouflage mesh and outdated warnings. To the Soul Dominion, the place was listed as structurally unstable. But to Sela, it was exactly where someone would hide if they didn't want to be found, and still wanted to see everything. Riven scanned the entrance with narrowed eyes. "You sure this is where she is?" Sela didn't answer. She just stepped forward. The interior was colder than expected. Not physically, emotionally, like the place hadn't known laughter or breath in years. Dust danced in the filtered light from the fractured dome. Consoles blinked in standby mode, waiting like sleeping animals. Then she appeared. No greeting, no pretense. Dr. Yalara Dren stepped out from behind a cracked panel, eyes sharp, body frail, wrapped in a composite cloak stitched with Old Soul insignias. "You're late," she said. Sela blinked. "You expected us?" Dren tilted her head. "You were always going to come. That's what bloom entities do. Follow the pattern back to its seed." Riven stiffened. "We're not part of any pattern." She didn't laugh. "Aren't you? Then why do you dream in languages no human speaks? Why does your pain mirror hers when you're 5 rooms apart? Why does your biology still ping off the Vault Thera 9 deep sleep registers, even though you're standing here awake?" Sela stepped forward. "You helped build the Bloom Core circuit. I helped bury it," Dren snapped. "And I've been regretting that decision ever since." She turned, activated a side terminal. Holographic DNA strands spiraled upward, twin helixes wrapped in not 2, but 3 spiraling threads. The third glowed faint green. "This," she said, pointing to the green strand, "is the bloom line. It doesn't replicate. It grows. Adaptive DNA that carries emotional resonance as part of its base sequence. It's not alien. It's not human. It's pre-classification. A biology we don't have a language to name." She looked at them both. "You are not anomalies. You are intentional. Part of Project Verdant Bloom. The only part that survived maturation." Riven's hands curled into fists. "You're saying we were grown?" Dren nodded slowly. "From engineered genomes harvested near Vault Thera 9, yes. You weren't born. You were bloomed." Silence. Then Sela whispered, "Why us?" "Because your pairing stabilized the thorn link. You feel each other beyond the cerebral level. You're not a network. You're a feedback loop. One finishes the other's emotional process. That made you perfect candidates for early awakening." Riven turned away, jaw clenched, staring at the cracked dome above. Sela stood still, voice steady. "And what happens when the rest wake up?" Dren didn't answer at first. Then softly, "That's why I called you here." She tapped a final key on the terminal, pulling up a hidden file. Vault Thera 9. Still active. Still broadcasting. "You're not the end of the program," she said. "You're the signal." The alarm started as a low vibration in the floor. By the time Riven Corin recognized it wasn't part of Dr. Dren's system, the observatory's emergency lights had already turned blood red. "They found us," Sela said, her voice steady but sharp. Dren didn't argue. She slammed her palm on the wall console, opening a sub-level corridor hidden beneath rusted floor panels. "Down," she ordered. "Take the lower tunnel. There's an old Virex-class Talon ship in Bay 9. It's yours now." Riven stared at her. "You're not coming?" She shook her head. "I was part of the lie. You're part of what might fix it." Outside, the first tremor of a forced entry charge hit the outer bulkhead. The observatory had seconds left. Sela grabbed his arm. "Now, Riv." They ran. The tunnel was narrow, lit by flickering maintenance strips and the distant thud of boots above. Bloomhold security didn't chase. They hunted. Protocols for detaining rogue entities like them were direct. Stun, isolate, contain. Or worse. As they reached the end of the corridor, another figure emerged from the dark. Medek Solan. He didn't smile, but the relief in his eyes was real. "Dr. Dren pinged me. Didn't think you'd actually go." Riven exhaled, voice low. "Didn't think we'd have to." Medek doset sala adata drive. Nav codes, fuel bypass, and a temporary block on your Thornlink pings. One hold long. Get to the edge of the Fron divide, then burn hard for relay silence. She nodded. "What about you?" He held up a small remote. "I've got cleanup. Once you're off-world, I'm wiping the access chain. They won't trace it back here." Footsteps thundered in the distance. "Go!" Marek hissed. The Talon ship waited like a sleeping predator in the launch bay. Its surface weathered, hull patched with mismatched plating, but alive. It still bore the old emblem of the Soul Dominion, half scratched out like a scar. Riven powered up the core as Sela strapped in. The interface recognized their biosignatures instantly. Authorized, Bloom Entity Designation, active. The engines flared to life. As the hangar doors groaned open, Sela looked once more toward the collapsing corridor behind them. "Marek." Static crackled on the comms. "I'll cover the lie," his voice said, faint. "You live the truth." Then silence. They launched. Out of Bloomhold. Out of command. Out of everything they were told to be. And into the unknown. The stars above the Fron divide were unfamiliar, cold, motionless things that offered no comfort. But inside the stolen Virex-class Talon ship, Sela Corin wasn't looking at the stars. She was holding her chest. It started as a thrum, low and internal, like a second heartbeat hiding beneath her own. At first, she thought it was the residual strain from the Thornlink sink. But this was different. This wasn't a connection. It was a signal. "Riven," she said, voice barely above a whisper. He turned from the NAV console. "What's wrong?" She tried to explain, but couldn't form the words. Her body felt both distant and too close, like her skin was a barrier and a transmitter at the same time. Her breath stuttered. Suddenly, the ship's sensor array flared to life. Unidentified frequency detected. The console lit up in pulses, matching the exact rhythm of Sela's pulse. The same pattern, the same wavelength. Her heartbeat was broadcasting. Riven moved fast, switching views to external scan. "This isn't a leak. You're sending something." Sela's fingers dug into the console edge. "I can't stop it." He accessed the signal's trajectory path, his jaw tightening. "It's headed toward Relay Tower, Ethela." She looked at him, wide-eyed. "That tower hasn't been active in decades. Then why is it answering?" On the screen, a second pulse returned, faint but undeniable. The frequency was ancient, older than anything registered in Sol Dominion archives. It wasn't military. It wasn't alien. It was matching her. The console emitted a soft chime. "Bioresonant lock confirmed." Riven stepped back from the screen, eyes locked on the gentle rhythm echoing across the stars. "What if," he said slowly, "you're not broadcasting at all?" Sela looked at him, her face pale. "What if you're being called?" The air inside Vault Thera 9 didn't move. Even the hum of the Virex-class Talon ship's engines, still cooling in the docking bay behind them, seemed unwilling to follow Riven and Sela Corin through the threshold. They stepped into the dark. The entrance had no guards, no security systems, only the faint shimmer of dormant energy across the walls. Organic, almost nervous, like the vault itself was aware it was being watched. Sela ran her hand along the nearest support column. It pulsed beneath her fingertips. "This place is alive," she whispered. Riven said nothing. He was focused on the hallway ahead, wide, curved like a ribcage, leading into the main chamber. The deeper they walked, the more their Thornlink buzzed, not with pain, but with proximity. Something familiar, something kin. And then, without warning, the corridor opened. The rooted hall. It was vast, more cathedral than lab. The walls rose in graceful arcs of bone-white alloy interwoven with veins of living light. Hundreds, no, thousands of containment pods lined the interior, stacked in spirals that curved up into shadow. Each pod pulsed faintly with bioluminescent green, like a heartbeat inside a womb. Sela froze. Riven stepped forward, drawn like a tide. Inside the pods were bodies. Human-shaped, but not human. Variations. Subtle at first, slightly elongated limbs, mirrored pupils, skin that shimmered faintly under the vault's ambient light. But as they moved deeper, the resemblance sharpened. One had Sela's mouth. Another had Riven's brow. One, near the center, had their mother's eyes. Riven's voice broke. "What is this?" Sela didn't answer. She walked slowly between the rows, stopping at a pod labeled in faded script. PVBL 0001A. Inside lay a girl, younger than her. Hair, silver white. Hands folded across her chest. The face was wrong, and yet painfully familiar. Not a clone, not a copy. An origin. "This is where they built us," Sela said softly. "Not in a lab. In a pattern." Riven stared at the array of bodies, some with features that belonged to them, others that looked like potential versions, paths not taken. "Every variation," he murmured. "Every failed combination. They weren't just trying to create soldiers. They were composing us." He touched the glass of one pod. The balloon inside stirred just slightly. No breath, but motion, as if the presence of its mirror self had triggered something ancient and buried. Sela backed away. Her Thornlink buzzed harder now, harder than ever before. "We shouldn't be here," she said. "We're not visitors. We're echoes." Riven clenched his fists. "Then what's waking them?" A light blinked across the ceiling, small, amber. Activation sequence. Standby. Neither of them had touched a thing. The vault had recognized them. The chamber lights in Vault Thera 9 shifted. No longer green. Now pulsing amber. A warning? A welcome? Sela Corin stepped back instinctively, her hand brushing against Riven's shoulder as containment pod PVBL 0001A hissed. The seals retracted with a... The pod door slid open. Steam curled out, clinging to the figure inside as it stirred. Slowly, fluidly, unnaturally calm. The girl, no, the woman, stepped out barefoot, skin glowing faintly where the vault light kissed it. Her hair, long and silver white, fell in strands down her back like threads of memory. She didn't look around. She didn't flinch. She looked directly at Sela, and she smiled. "I wonder how long it would take you to return," she said. Sela's voice cracked. "Who are you?" The woman tilted her head. "That depends. What are you?" Riven moved in front of his sister, protective. "Back off." But the woman didn't advance. She simply regarded him with a look of gentle recognition, almost maternal. "You must be Riven," she said, still carrying the guilt for a pain that was never yours. His fist clenched. Sela stepped beside him. "Answer me. Who are you?" The woman's smile faded. "I am Sela Prime, the first stable bloom, the design from which you were branched, or, as the Soul Dominion called me, the uncontrollable prototype." Silence pressed into the space between them like gravity. Sela stared at her. Same posture, same voice pattern, same subtle tilt of the chin. It was like looking into a mirror that had never cracked. "No," Sela whispered. "You're not me." "I didn't say I was," Sela Prime replied. "But you are of me. You're saying I'm a copy?" "A branch," Prime corrected gently. "A viable divergence from the core seed, designed to carry forward traits that made me unstable, but essential." Riven stepped in. "Then why wake up now?" "Why now, if you've been sleeping here this whole time?" Sela Prime's eyes narrowed, and her tone shifted. "Because the signal was activated. The verdant pulse. You carried it to me, through your sister's body. That's what you are now, Sela. A transmitter. A pathfinder. And the moment you stepped into this hall, the system recognized the loop as closed." Sela felt her heart beating wildly, but her limbs remained locked in place. "You're lying," she whispered. "You're manipulating me." Sela Prime approached, slow and fluid, never threatening. But the weight of her presence was undeniable. "I'm not your enemy," she said. "I am your continuation, your memory in motion. But the difference between us, dear Echo, is that I remember everything. You were built to forget." Riven stepped forward again, planting himself between them. "Don't come near her." Sela Prime stopped, inches from him. She didn't blink. "You can't protect her from what she is," she said. "You never could." Sela touched Riven's arm, pulling him gently back. "I need to know," she said quietly. "If she's telling the truth, I need to see it." Sela Prime extended a hand, not in threat, but in invitation. "Then come with me," she said, "to the memory chamber." "And if I don't?" Sela asked. Sela Prime's expression softened, almost sorrowful. "Then you'll remain a question that never answers itself." Riven had always felt his sister in the background of his mind. Not words, not thoughts, but a rhythm, a tether. The thorn link had connected him to Sela since the day they were born, or grown, or built, or whatever truth now stood behind that word. Even in silence, even across rooms or in combat drills, her presence thrummed inside him like a second pulse. But now, nothing. It started subtly, like static interference. After the encounter with Sela Prime, they had walked together down the outer passage of Vault 39, saying nothing. But Riven kept glancing sideways. Something was wrong. He couldn't feel her. She was right there, 3 feet away, but her presence had thinned like fog burned off in morning light. "Sel," he said, trying to keep his voice neutral. "Say something." She didn't respond. He stopped walking. "So now you're not talking to me?" She halted too, but her eyes didn't meet his. "I'm still here." "No, you're not." That made her look. "What's that supposed to mean?" He pointed to his temple. "You've been quiet before, cold before, but I always felt you, even when you hated me." She flinched just slightly. "I don't feel you now," he said. "And it's not distance. It's not the thorn link malfunctioning. It's you. You're pulling back." Sela looked down at her hands. She turned them slowly, as if seeing them for the first time. "I don't know what's mine anymore," she whispered. "My thoughts, my memories, they keep shifting. Ever since she touched me, Sela Prime, I keep remembering things I never lived. But they feel like mine." "You're scared," Riven said softly. She nodded. "But not in the way I used to be. It's not fear of dying. It's fear of becoming." He reached for her hand, and for the first time in his life, there was no feedback, no emotional loop, just skin. He blinked. "Sel." Her hand pulled away. "I think the thorn link's breaking," she said, voice flat. "No, you're choosing to break it." She shook her head. "I don't think I am." Then softer, as if to herself, "I think she's already replacing it." Riven staggered back like he'd been hit. The hall felt narrower, colder. His chest ached with something deeper than injury. The connection they'd always trusted, always relied on, was slipping through his fingers. And the worst part? He didn't know if she even missed it. Sela Corin moved through the subvault alone, the silence heavy with choice. Vault Thera 9 wasn't just a biological archive. It was a system, a living one. The further she walked, the more she felt it, reacting. Doors didn't unlock. They unfurled. Lights didn't switch on. They bloomed. She passed clusters of dormant bloom entities, each sealed in hibernation, each humming with faint potential. At the end of the corridor stood a wall that pulsed with 3 concentric circles, green, silver, and violet. When she placed her hand against it, the wall dissolved. Inside was a control chamber, curved panels, neural filaments dangling like vines, and in the center, a single pedestal. No screens, no buttons, just a cradle. And inside it, a smooth, translucent core the size of her palm. It glowed faintly, rhythmic like a breath. A whisper moved across the chamber, unspoken words inside her mind. Verdant reversal protocol, dormant. She swallowed hard. This was what Sela Prime had meant. This was the core of it all. The bloom core circuit inside every bloom entity wasn't just a connection. It was a limiter, a selective partitioning of identity. It chose what to remember, and more importantly, what to forget. The reversal would undo that. Sela circled the pedestal, every instinct torn between reaching and retreating. The Soul Dominion had classified bloom entities as functionally human, as long as their cognitive growth remained within acceptable ranges. But if she activated this, she wouldn't be within those ranges anymore. Her memories would no longer be curated. She would no longer be as Sela designed. She would be something original. From behind her, a soft chime echoed. Riven's voice came through her wrist collar. Instead, she stepped forward and laid her fingers over the core. A pulse shot through her chest. Not pain, but pressure. A kind of weight behind her eyes, as if something ancient had just shifted to make room. The whisper returned. Confirm full access. Initiate verdant reversal. She hovered over the confirmation node. No code needed, no security clearance. Just intent. She closed her eyes. Her lips parted. But before she could speak the confirmation phrase, a memory rose, unbidden. Not hers. Not exactly. A field. A war. A name whispered in a voice like her own. A command she never gave. A death she never saw, but felt. She staggered back. Was this her memory? Or was the reversal already leaking? She deactivated the core, heart pounding. Not yet. Not without telling Riven. Not until she was ready to lose the version of herself that had grown beside him. The platform beneath Vault Thera 9's central atrium curved like the inside of a flower. Wide, empty, and waiting to close. Riven Corin stood on one side, still breathing hard from running through the corridors to find her. Sela stood at the other, her silhouette illuminated by the faint green glow of the verdant reversal core behind her. They hadn't spoken in minutes. The Thorn Link was silent. Not broken, not dead, just absent. What did you find? Riven asked, though part of him already knew. Sela didn't look at him. It's real. The protocol. Everything we suspected. He stepped closer, voice low. And it's a choice, she said. I activate it. I see everything. I remember what I was designed to forget. Riven's hands clenched. And lose what's left of yourself. She finally met his eyes. Or finally become who I was meant to be. You're already you, he said. Sela Corin. My sister. That's not nothing. She took a step forward. Then why do I feel hollow when you say it? Why do I feel more like her than me? Sela Prime isn't you, Riven said. She's a blueprint, not a person. But she remembers, Sela said, voice shaking. And I walk around with fragments of that memory, scratching at the inside of my skull. He shook his head. You don't need all the answers. We can figure this out. Together. Sela hesitated. Then she looked down at her own hands. The way the light shimmered beneath the skin now, faint and unnatural. I think we already passed together, she said softly. That hit harder than any blow. You're not coming back with me, are you? Riven asked. She stepped past him, not touching, not explaining. I have to go with her, she said. With Sela Prime. There's more to this than the Dominion, than the war. There's a history buried inside me, and it's not waiting anymore. Riven didn't follow. He just watched her walk toward the far corridor, where Sela Prime waited in silence, framed by the glow of something older than war or loyalty. The connection between them had once been unbreakable. Now it hung like a frayed thread between two minds drifting out of sync. He didn't try to call her back, because he knew. She wasn't lost. She was changing. The surface of Calyx Varn had never been considered fertile. Cold, arid, layered with iron-rich dust and fractured shale plains. It had been labeled a tactical outpost planet, nothing more. Strategic high ground. No atmosphere worth terraforming. No ecosystem worth preserving. Until now, Riven stood on the edge of a rise, overlooking the basin below. But the landscape had changed. No longer red-gray rock. No longer lifeless. The valley, once cracked and dead, was covered in a shifting blanket of green. But not vegetation. This was verdancy. It pulsed. The surface had opened itself like skin breathing. Tendrils of semi-organic rootwork sprawled across entire ridgelines, glittering with bioluminescence in rhythmic patterns, signals pulsing from node to node like a living nervous system. Bloom forms had emerged from the vaults, not in rank or march, but in growth. They did not run. They did not fly. They spread. Where they walked, the ground responded. Where they touched, the soil turned dark with vitality. The rootborn had awakened. He watched as one stepped forward from a ridge, arms outstretched. Her skin shifted in the sunlight, pale silver woven with green and violet threads. A dozen others followed her, all different, all familiar. Echoes of something he once trained to kill. They weren't building weapons. They were becoming the world. Verdant colonization, whispered a voice behind him. He turned to see Dr. Yalara Dren, her face drawn but not afraid. This was never about conquest, she said. Not really. The rootborn were designed to awaken when we proved too violent to sustain the original intent. Not to fight us, to outlive us. And the Dominion? Riven asked, jaw tight. They won't see this as life, Dren replied. They'll see it as infestation. Below them, a bloom form knelt beside a broken comms tower and placed a hand on the metal. The structure responded, not with sparks, but with color. Vines coiled upward, integrating rather than replacing. Not erasing the past, absorbing it. Riven clenched his fists. This isn't a battlefield anymore, he said. No, Dren agreed. It's a biome. But even as she said it, overhead, the clouds began to shimmer. Atmospheric sensors chirped on his wrist pad. Dropships entering orbit. Too soon. Too many. The Soul Dominion had arrived. Riven took a step back, eyes scanning the sky. The signals were encrypted, heavy with combat protocol. They weren't here to talk. Dren touched his arm. This is the moment, Riven. If the Dominion sees them first, all they'll ever be is targets. He looked again to the field of Rootborn. They had no defenses, no formations, no war stance, only openness. He had trained for this. Dozens of missions, simulations, doctrines. But nothing had prepared him for watching life choose not to resist. The Thornlink buzzed faintly, old, unstable. He turned his eyes east toward the last range of the Fron Divide, where he thought, maybe, just maybe, Sela still watched all this from the shadows. And even if she didn't, even if she'd chosen to stand with something not human, not alien, not even definable, he wasn't sure anymore that she'd made the wrong choice. Because this wasn't war. This was awakening. And it was already too late to stop it. The first blast hit the southern ridge with a roar that shattered the quiet. The ground beneath Riven boots shook, loam and rock flung skyward in a fiery column. A moment later, the scream of Dominion assault engines tore through the clouds, followed by streaks of silver cutting the atmosphere like scalpels. Soul Dominion had made its move. Riven was already moving before the second impact hit. His unit, 12 soldiers from Echo Line, formed up fast, trained reflexes overriding panic. Comms lit up with overlapping commands, targeting data, and warnings he barely heard. His HUD flashed alerts, bloom activity detected. Class unknown. Engage with caution. He switched to command channel. This is Commander Corrin. Pull flanks back to grid line. No one questioned him. His name still carried weight. His tone still held authority. But his heart was somewhere else. Sela. She had to be here. This wasn't a coincidence. The blooms had spread too fast, too wide, too deliberately. Vault Thera. 9 was within range. Relay Tower, Ethela pulsed faintly on the edge of his scanner, like a heart beating beneath soil. And still, no signal from her. The battlefield was chaos dressed in color. Bloom forms surged across the terrain, not as soldiers, but as systems. Vines moved like nervous tissue, encasing metal and melting weapons into harmless frameworks of green. The sky rained ash from Dominion strike pods, but wherever fire landed, petals followed, released by Rooborn in response. Ash and petals. Fire and growth. Destruction met regeneration in real time. His squad held the line, but no one fired unless threatened. Even the Dominion troopers hesitated. This wasn't an enemy you could aim at. It wasn't hiding. It wasn't attacking. It was changing everything around it. Riven dropped behind a chunk of fractured armor plating, breath short, rifle limp in his hands. Across the smoke, a bloom form stepped through the wreckage. A childlike figure with luminous eyes and tendrils trailing behind her like hair caught in wind. She looked at him, unarmed, unprotected, and entirely unafraid. He raised his weapon instinctively. Her eyes didn't blink, didn't plead, just waited. "Sir," came a voice over his comm. "Orders?" He didn't answer. His finger hovered above the trigger. Then something shifted in the dirt behind him. He spun, weapon up, only to see one of his own men, Private Rail, hunched over coughing. "Gas?" Riven asked. "No, sir." Rail choked. "Spores. Not toxic. Just overwhelming." He helped him up. The soldier's eyes were red, but not in pain. Just confusion. "I saw my childhood," Rail whispered. "For a second, I swear to you, I was in my grandmother's greenhouse." Riven said nothing. He looked again toward the bloom-formed child. She was gone. In her place, the ground had shifted into soft moss, bioluminescent and warm beneath his boots. Where a weapon had exploded seconds ago, now bloomed a patch of violet flora, pulsing gently with stored heat. "Sir, new orders just came in," his lieutenant said grimly. "Dominion fleet authorized full purge. No salvage. No prisoners. Anything connected to Verdant activity is to be erased." Riven closed his eyes. The thorn link throbbed faintly in the back of his skull. And for the first time in days, he felt something, a flicker, not quite Sela's thoughts, but the echo of her breath. A direction. He opened his eyes. "Split formation," he said. "I'm taking a recon team north. Relay tower, Ethela, may be coordinating ground signals. I want eyes on it." "Sir, that's off limits." "Command just." "I am command." And with that, Riven moved, through ash, through petals, through fire and regrowth, toward the one place that might still hold her. The place where war wasn't being fought, but rewritten. The transmission crackled to life in Riven's comlink, cutting through the static and haze of the scorched battlefield. "Riven, it's me. Don't respond, just listen." The voice was unmistakable. Merex Solan, alive, and in the heart of the Dominion's captured zone. Riven froze in the underbrush, one knee in the ash-covered earth just outside the northern perimeter of Calyxvarn. The wind carried faint howls of war machines, but his mind tuned it out, fixated on the sound of his old friend, his brother in every way but blood. "I'm in one of their extraction units," Marek continued, his voice low, controlled. "They think I'm bloom-affected. I'll let them think that. I needed to get close. To confirm it." Riven's grip on his rifle tightened. "Marek, what are you doing?" The answer came like a whisper on broken glass. "She's not the threat, River Sela. None of them are. The threat is what they'll do to her. What they plan to make her into. A hollow breath. They've moved past using bloom forms as weapons. Now, they're trying to override identity, recode consciousness. They're calling it Project Verdant Reversal. It's not about survival. It's about total erasure of self, starting with her." Riven stood slowly, heart pounding like a war drum. The comm link crackled again. "I rigged the stasis core. Only way I could send this out without triggering a Dominion scrub." "You what?" Riven hissed. "Marek, no." "You always said I couldn't follow orders," Marek said, smiling through the comm. "Guess I'm finally proving you right." A pause. "Tell her she's more than what they made. Tell her she still gets to choose." The channel went dead, and then the sky ignited. The eastern quadrant of the Dominion field outpost erupted into a column of blue fire, a controlled detonation from inside the core. Marek's location. Gone. The shockwave rippled through the vines surrounding Calyxvarn, and for a moment, all of them, the soldiers, the bloom forms, the Dominion drones, froze. The war had blinked, not in silence, but in grief. Riven stood at the edge of the blast zone by nightfall, smoke curling around his boots like phantom fingers. He didn't speak, didn't cry. He just knelt where the earth still trembled faintly with residual energy. A burnt scrap of armor lay beside him, etched with Marek's call sign, Echo Flare. Sela appeared behind him, silent, hands trembling. "You felt it," Riven said softly. Yes, she replied. I felt them let go. They stayed like that, two fragments of a broken future, trying to catch breath in a world that no longer knew how to pause. He did it for you, Riven finally said. No, Sela whispered. He did it for us. She knelt beside him, fingers brushing the ash-covered soil. He gave us a choice. And in that moment, the war, so long dictated by commands and protocols and inherited loyalties, shifted. It no longer belonged to Dominion. It no longer followed orders. It now belonged to those who still believed in choice. And Marek Solon was the first to die for it. Relay Tower, Ethela, stood like a withered monolith against the dusk, its upper spires long collapsed, cables drooping like the severed veins of a dying god. The Dominion had abandoned it years ago after deeming it bio-corrupted. But now it thrummed again, soft, rhythmic, alive. Sela Corin stood at its center, her palms flat against the moss-covered console. The bloom had crept in, threading around the equipment, fusing plant and machine into something ancient, something new. Her fingers trembled, not with fear, but resonance. She could feel them, every bloom form across the verge. Breathing, evolving, waiting. They were no longer extensions of programming. They were a field of awareness, stretching miles in all directions, connected by sensation, memory, pain. Sela closed her eyes. I'm not your commander, she whispered to the living system. And I'm not your creator. I'm your sister. And I'm tired of being used. She reached deeper into the console, letting her neural bloom cores sync with the ancient systems. Verdant reversal hovered at the edge of activation, a protocol forbidden by Dominion law. Riven's voice echoed from behind. You don't have to do this. She didn't turn. He died for a choice, Riven. I'm giving it back to them. The circuit flared green beneath her touch, and the pulse began. It wasn't just a sound, it was language, emotive frequency, a memory bloom. The signal flooded out from Ethela, riding subdermal currents through the atmosphere. It didn't target weapons. It bypassed soldiers. It went to the rootborn, to those sleeping in vaults, to those fighting in trenches, to those still questioning who they were. Every bloom form, every biohybrid, every twisted evolution of man and plant heard her. Her voice, her memory, her pain. You're not code. You're not property. You're not mistakes. You're becoming. We are the menders, the growers, the seed of something better. And we are blooming. Now, across Calyx Varn, the reaction was immediate. Rootborn units halted mid-charge, vines retracting from weapons. A Dominion tank stalled as its driver collapsed, overwhelmed by forememory. In the fields, dormant pods split open. Not in violence, but in curiosity. Riven watched the horizon flicker, not with fire, but with color. Greens, ambers, deep blues rippled like auroras over the battle lines. The war paused, not by order, by understanding. Back inside the tower, Sela collapsed to her knees, breathing heavily. The pulse had taken something from her, her strength, her certainty. But in its place bloomed clarity. Riven reached her, catching her before she fully fell. You changed everything, he said quietly. No, Sela whispered, resting her head against his shoulder. They did. I just reminded them who they are. And far above them, the relay tower hummed. Not with signal, but with life. The war was supposed to end with a broadcast, a final command, a peace accord, something clean. But what followed the pulse was anything but. Across Calyx Varn, order collapsed. Not into chaos, but into something stranger, older, untamed. The Rootborn didn't retreat. They transformed. Without centralized command, without Thornlink oversight or Dominion biolocks, the bloom forms began shifting. Limbs became tendrils. Armor melted into bark and bone. New growth erupted along the scorched ground. Sentient, searching, weaving. And for the first time since the verdant reversal was whispered into ancient code, they chose. Not by directive. Not by programming. By will. Some Rootborn laid down their weapons, walking into the forest that bloomed from their own feet. Others expanded, stretching across terrain like living bridges, lifting wounded from both sides to safety. A few, hardened, twisted into towering behemoths, not out of hatred, but instinct, survival, distrust. And in that disarray, the Dominion panicked. Sectors scrambled to issue fresh orders, only to find their command trees corrupted, intercepted by alien neural signatures that no longer recognized their hierarchy. Fleet Commander Haurix Vade, orbiting above, watched as the HUD over Calyx varned bled red, green, and unfamiliar bioluminescence. Signals overlapped. Protocols failed. He clenched his fist. This isn't a battle anymore, he muttered. It's a bloom storm. On the ground, Riven moved through the aftermath with a half-burned rifle and a fully fractured sense of purpose. He saw Dominion soldiers holding hands with root-born hybrids, not knowing why. He saw a young ensign weeping as her former enemy wrapped her wounds in living petals. He saw Sela, standing in the center of it all, her eyes glowing faintly, not with power, but acceptance. Sela, he said, breathless, this isn't peace. No, she replied, watching a root-born child build a nest for broken drone parts. It's evolution. He frowned. We can't control this. That's the point, she whispered. We were never meant to. Behind her, a root-born tendril brushed the charred remains of a Dominion comm tank. It pulsed softly, green, blue, gold, then reseeded, leaving the metal hole. Not as it was, but reborn. The tech hummed with both circuit and sap. Everything's merging, Riven said, staring. Sela turned to him, voice quiet but firm. Not everything needs a blueprint, Riven. Sometimes life writes its own. As night fell, the battlefield glowed. Fungal lanterns floated in the wind. Hybrid trees whispered old codes to one another, their bark etched with language both human and alien. Above, the stars watched. Below, a new ecosystem awakened. Not ruled, not conquered, but alive. Some Dominion forces would retreat. Others would adapt. Some root-born would become guardians. Others would wander into the verge, carrying with them fragments of memory, song, and seed. But one truth remained clear. The bloom would no longer wait for permission. Calyx Var no longer resembled a war zone. Where craters once marked the soil, luminous mosses now blanketed the ground in waves of bioluminescent green. Trees that had never been planted sprouted from cracked stone, their trunks braided with veins of light that pulsed in rhythm with the wind. Vines climbed twisted steel and broken hulls, not to choke, but to weave them into something living. The air tasted of renewal, humid, electric, sweet with unfamiliar pollens. Riven Corin stepped over what had once been a Dominion siege crawler. It was now half submerged in what looked like a shallow lake of translucent sap. Within it, root-born flora swayed gently like kelp beneath the surface. He knelt, touched the edge of the pool, and watched it ripple, not outward but inward, folding the reflection of his face into something softly unfamiliar. The verdancy wasn't rebuilding. It was remaking. There were no orders now, no command posts, no flags. The root-born hadn't organized a society in any recognizable sense, but still, there was structure. Petal tower clusters formed communication hubs. Bioluminescent pathways adjusted to motion, guiding travelers like veins beneath translucent skin. Creatures moved without fear, some with humanoid features, others like blooming thoughts given form. It was peaceful, and yet Riven had never felt more out of place. He walked through what had once been the Eastern Ridge, now renamed by the root-born as the Grove of Becoming. Where the final bombardment from Sol Dominion had scorched the sky, now rose a canopy of radiant leaves, whispering to one another through bursts of color Riven couldn't quite interpret. Children, if that's what they were, played nearby. Some ran on two legs. Others floated slightly above the ground, laughter humming through the air in soft echoes. And no matter where he turned, he couldn't find Sela. Not in form, not in voice, not yet. She's here, he whispered aloud. Not for reassurance, not for hope, just as a fact. He knew it. A root-born figure stepped beside him, slender, silver-green, with eyes like dusk after rainfall. It tilted its head, not quite curious, not quite indifferent. Then, with a motion both gentle and deliberate, it extended one vine-like finger toward the horizon. In the distance, a bloom tree larger than any other pulsed once with amber light. The figure didn't speak, but Riven understood. He walked again, toward the tree, toward the signal, toward whatever came next. Not as a soldier, not as... He found it nestled in the cradle of a half-bloomed lumen tree, where the petals folded like protective hands over the core. It wasn't glowing like the others. Instead, its surface shimmered with a soft, internal rhythm, like a heartbeat remembered more than felt. Riven reached out, hesitating just before contact. He knew what it was. A lumen seed. But unlike the ones used for communication during war, tactile pulses, shared commands, this one felt personal, sacred. He touched it with 2 fingers. The world around him paused. Light folded inward. Time unraveled just enough. And then, her voice, Riven, came to whisper. It wasn't quite Sela's, not as he remembered it. There was no urgency, no static, just warmth, intimate and still. If you're hearing this, then you survived me. Or maybe I've become something you no longer recognize. He sat down against the lumen tree, breathing shallowly. I didn't disappear, the voice continued. I just changed. The verdancy wasn't just growing inside me. It was me. The protocol, the blooming, it wasn't corruption. It was memory waiting to be released. She paused, a silence that felt like a smile. I was afraid of leaving you, of not being your seal anymore. But even the petals that fall nourish the roots. The seed vibrated subtly. A final pulse. You taught me choice, Riven. Not code, not orders. Choice. So I chose to bloom. The light faded. And that was it. No coordinates. No hidden data. Just a message not meant to be decoded, but held. Riven didn't cry. Not in the way he had as a soldier, when grief was sharp and sudden. This was different. It was soft, like rain after drought. He closed his hand around the lumen seed, its warmth sinking into his palm like a fading sun. He didn't say goodbye. He just stood and walked back toward the tree line, where the light pulsed in rhythm with something new, something alive. They gathered beneath the glass spires of Nova Ethera, a neutral orbiting citadel long abandoned after the collapse accords. Now, it shimmered to life again, repurposed by urgency. The Verge Assembly, voices from across the fractured sectors of the galaxy, had come not to argue, but to decide. Riven stood behind a transparent barrier, looking down into the assembly chamber. The delegates wore no uniforms. There were no flags, only silence, broken by pulses of translated thought projected through the central node. Dr. Yalaradrin stood at the podium. Her voice was calm, resolute. The Rootborn are not soldiers anymore, she said. They're not threats, nor are they tools. They're a new ecosystem built on memory, nurtured by choice. One delegate, scaled and hollow-eyed, stood. They spread like invasive species. Another, human, countered. No, they settled where we left nothing but ash. Riven listened as the arguments unfolded. But they weren't about war. Not anymore. They were about what came after. Then, a visual feed flickered to life in the chamber. 2 children playing beneath a glowing canopy of bioluminescent vines. One with pale green eyes. One with gray. Both laughing. Bloom-born but unarmed. Uncommanded. This is what we inherit, Drin said. Almost a whisper. Not dominance. Not vengeance. Possibility. The chamber fell quiet. Then, one by one, lights around the central node began to turn green. Consensus. The Verge Assembly declared the Rootborn not as enemy, not as anomaly, but as a sovereign life form. Riven exhaled. The tension he'd carried since the day Veritas Bloomhold fell finally breaking apart like dust and wind. No orders, no conquest, just a future. And this time, they'd build it without erasing what bloomed along the way. The air in Calyx Var no longer hummed with tension. It breathed. Riven walked alone through the lower groves where bioluminescent trees had woven themselves into soft arches, their roots threading the earth like veins of thought. Petals drifted down like rainless snow, each one pulsing faintly with stored light. Life here wasn't built. It grew. He paused at the edge of a clearing where 2 children, barefoot and curious, played beside a shallow pool. One was tracing patterns in the dirt with a stick. The other was speaking slowly, her tongue shaping unfamiliar words with deliberate effort. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant. He knew those eyes. Bright green, curious, unguarded, yet underneath them flickered a familiar stillness, like the pause between heartbeats. Sela. Not her. Not entirely. But not her either. The other child tilted his head and mimicked the words she had just spoken. Laughter followed. It wasn't perfect speech. Not yet. But it was new. Earned. Unwritten. A small lumen seed hovered near them, responding to their tones like a tuning fork vibrating with delight. The children didn't notice Riven watching, and he didn't interrupt. He simply sat beneath the nearest glowing tree and watched the moment unfold. No lessons, no directives, just 2 new minds trying to understand the world. And perhaps, he thought, that was the only kind of beginning that ever mattered. Riven knelt beside a clearing where the earth had never known war. The soil was warm, pulsing faintly beneath his fingertips, as if it remembered the lives it had consumed and the lives it had promised to hold. Around him, the canopy shimmered with morning bloom light, not artificial, not programmed, just present. In his hand, a single lumen seed glowed soft white. He turned it over once. It didn't carry orders. No embedded mission codes. No network command from Soul Dominion. It was silent. Still. Waiting. For the first time in his life, he didn't ask what it meant. He didn't need a reason to plant it. Riven pressed his thumb into the dirt and lowered the seed in. He covered it gently, slowly, as if tucking in something sacred. Behind him, the wind moved through the frond divide, not as a warning or signal, but like breath exhaled through leaves. There were no armies now, no brothers and sisters built for war. Only those who had chosen to stay, those who had chosen to become. The ground gave no dramatic reaction, no pulse, no bloom flare, just a quiet hum, alive but not demanding. Riven stood and wiped his hands on his jacket, then looked to the sky. It was open again, not for conquest, not for command, for growth. And as he walked away, he didn't look back. Not because he was leaving something behind, but because somewhere beneath the surface, something was just beginning. And so, the war that began with commands and clones, with silence and steel, ended not in surrender, but in something stranger. In growth. In change. Riven Korin did not win a battle. He planted a seed. And somewhere beyond what the Soul Dominion could measure, or what the Verge Assembly could regulate, life began again. Unordered. Unclaimed. Undeniably real. Not every war is about destruction. Some wars bloom because something greater was waiting all along, just beneath the surface. Thank you for listening to The Blooming War. If this story moved you,